linked to what Oahspe says. Like it's tapping into this natural vortexian energy, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is something I can really get into and really get excited about and start talking about. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I'm
Oh
excited
yeah.
about that.
Yeah. I was thinking about the last conversation we had the other day. I was like, dude, I definitely need to do a video on this. I need to do a video on it. And I've just got out of a live where we were talking about the convergence between science and spirituality. And so I'm working on that video today, actually, because I have the Book of Oahspe and I do have those chapters. And so I had already started highlighting those things. But then I was like, you know what I can do? I can do a comparison direct fast to a variety of different discoveries over time using a chat GPT to against
Oh,
what Oahspe has already placed. And so that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to say, hey, this is what we've got, which is extraordinary in terms of like, it goes from obviously the cosmology section of it, which is what you were covering in your video the other day. And
yeah.
some other things as well, just even the symbology that was
Yeah.
used in order to represent these concepts. It ties together a variety of different like older from what's the word, the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, these cultures and what they were representing in terms of concepts. So and that stuff had not been done during that time prior to where when the Book of Oahspe was written. There was not a lot, if any, information pertaining to how that linked. So I found that to be pretty profound.
Yeah, it's crazy. It was written in 1882, and the depth of knowledge and the width of knowledge is like unbelievable.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
have you heard of the pyramid code?
No.
Okay, so this guy it has remained anonymous for his privacy. He was talking about um, electricity. I'm probably not going to be able to find the quote right now, but he was talking about electricity and the difference between naturally occurring electricity and when we generate electricity, right? And this goes right in line with um, um, ETH and the Vortexian currents that Oahspe talks about. He says naturally occurring electricity is everywhere and sustains everything. It is responsible for life, for the improvement of life. For it can be used negatively because everything has that potential. And the way he was describing it reminds me of either dark energy, dark matter, or ETH that's found in Oahspe. And he was saying that this naturally occurring electricity has so permeated everything. One, it reminds me of it would be like sort of the extension of the creator, like the body, the sort of the vapor of the creator, like like the breath of the creator. It's so in everything that when we understand it, that is the medium that our thoughts take form and power. Like telepathy, how can our thoughts travel from one person to another? It's because it's traveling on this naturally occurring electricity. It's so fascinating.
The
And
pyramid code is talking about this natural. And what is the distinction between natural electricity and generated electricity?
well, I don't know exactly how it works, but when you generate electricity, it is, I think what it is not full spectrum. And so you wind up with stuff like, he says that when you utilize technology that is reliant on artificial electricity, like we have with Wi-Fi, like we have with uh, radio signals, you wind up with a degeneration of life instead of rejuvenation of life. I think it's just a spectrum thing. it's like structured water. Like water that is structured and alive has a totally different effect than water that is, been, you know, treated and put in pipes and, chlorinated, and or even water that has been through reverse osmosis. Technically it's still water. It's just it has a different effect on the body.
Oh, I see. I see. Interesting. Yeah. So it comes down to process. Depending upon the process of generation of whatever it is, an example would be the process of growing a tomato. And there are a variety of different ways to grow a tomato organically or inorganically, or with inorganic catalysts. Then there's going to be a difference in terms of how the body will receive it and the offerings that it has. So yeah, that's very true. Or the process of like heating things up. An example you were talking about, if we generate a microwave and we cook a tomato, it certainly does a depletion in terms of the nutrients, as opposed to when we take a tomato and just cook it over a fire pit, for example. Right. So yes, both are generating a heat within the tomato, but one, the process of how it's working is going to have either a positive or a more negative impact in terms of its value. So offering. So that's very, very true. Very interesting. Yeah, you said it's called the pyramid code?
Yeah. Yep, it's pyramid code. The guy who wrote it is anonymous. He did like 10 interviews on this app, and I would have to remember the app. I could send it to you, the link to it. And the interviews are called Disclosure, and he's part of a group that is called the Light System, or System of Light.
Okay.
The light. Anyway, it's one of those groups that have been in the background trying to help humanity without interfering, which is kind of a tricky business.
Okay. Yeah, and he's anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. Okay. Yeah, I need to get this. Is it on the pyramid code? I won't forget. I remember that now. So yeah, I will find that. That's very interesting. And so what has been the growth happening with Oahspe? How are things progressing? Have there been more people who are has the circle of faithists increased?
That's kind of tricky. My wife and I talk about that. We have found a bunch of faithists, and I don't have because okay, I'll tell you what our observation is, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so most of the faithists that we interact with, we stop interacting with because they seem I don't know, they seem like they have found Oahspe, which is great, but they haven't had an ego death. Like they're very Oahspe is kind of like next level stuff. And so the arrogance of sort of being inside this, small group and, believing you have the truth and everyone else is wrong. It just reminds me of people who never really lost that mentality of religion. And so we don't really interact with them that much because they call themselves faithists, but they just haven't grown enough to embody the essence of it. Like you have to lose that religious mindset.
Yeah.
So for that reason, we don't really seek out faithists that much anymore. Like it's always open. Like I'm in part of, Facebook and different groups. Oh, there's this family that I'm really excited about interviewing. They do homeschooling, and they're on a homestead, and they are faithists, and they use the Book of Oahspe part of their curriculum. And so they were sick for a couple weeks, and I haven't had a contact with them. I'm excited about doing that interview, but I really
Nice.
don't know about the growth of faithism. If there is growth, I couldn't tell you about like the quality of the growth. It doesn't appear to be like what is outlined in a Oahspe. I don't see reflected in the growth that's around. I'll just say that much.
Okay, that's understandable. The
It,
Faithist, yeah, the Book of Oahspe. I'm surprised that it has remained so unheard of. In one respect, because of the knowledge that it's providing.
mm-hmm.
I figured I would have heard of it, but you introduced me definitely to it. I had not heard of it prior. So I definitely think on one hand, I was having this discussion in another live. Basically, when certain people are presented with truth, things that are objectively verifiable,
Yeah.
and certainly are identified as foundational, some will still reject that
Mm.
regardless, simply because it's not something that they prefer.
Yeah.
So it's, in my view, I would say I'm gonna do the video and say here are a variety of different sources, one of which is the Book of Oahspe, which is discussing scientific principles and cosmology well before its time. I'm fitting it in also with theosophy. Theosophy, the book of Daizan, discusses these things, and it also is providing very detailed cosmological information that we verified through science only within the last 50 years. And this book was, predates that by 1,000. And, here we go. What generally I know will occur with skeptics is just simply, well, how do we know that this book was really written then? And if it were, and it happens to be this information, it's still somehow wrong because it doesn't have all of this exact detail in it, and etc. Anything that's going to discredit, regardless of the fact that, wow, you're telling me that they knew about black holes and the expansion of space well over 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years ago, and we're writing about it in detail. That's significant.
Yeah.
Probably no, they're not going to be open to that. So I accept that. I realize that, but I'm going to continue to push the narrative that regardless of whether or not established science appreciates the reality that knowledge pertaining to the universe existed, was disseminated, and utilized before their current era. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important for others to be aware that there are credible sources of those things, of this knowledge and of that reality. And I think the Book of Oahspe, I love that there's illustration in
Oh
the
yeah.
book because it really does, it brings that point home.
Mm-hmm. So I just thought of sort of go back to what you asked me before about growth on TikTok. I I'm on a list. I don't know if it's going to happen to go onto someone's podcast. I think that would be cool because that would be always nice to connect with other people's platforms. She Oh, you I've sent you her video. She's that blonde. She does that not no nonsense spirituality. She's
Oh my,
the
she is so amazing.
yeah.
She she did a video just last week that was extraordinary in its profound truth. She was just throwing out maxim after maxim. It was literally word of truth, word of truth,
Mm.
of truth. She wasn't even just expounding on it. It was very powerful. I know who you're
Oh
talking about. She's amazing.
yeah, Brett. I contacted her. and she said that she's booked out for like 6 months, which is cool. I don't even know what I would say in that arena. Like she talks with like academics and like professionals. Like I'm just a dude in in their bedroom, but it would be cool to get the word out. And then this other lady, I did a video trying to get her attention, and she does a lot of word science, like etymology of words, and some of the things that she has concluded reminds me of Oahspe, and so for like a year I've been trying to get her attention. I've finally connected with her. So hopefully there will be more exposure. And I've been begging these I've connected with like 10 faithists here on TikTok, and I've been begging them to start making content. And one of them, the only content he produces is like selfie dance videos with his shirt off. Like, okay. Dude, like,
Well, that's
I
not
don't,
exactly um gonna.
I don't understand why what's going on here.
Well, wow. Well,
Everybody's on the
okay.
same journey. But, like I said, some of the faithists that I interact with were not really on the same journey, or at least not on the same stage.
Right. Yeah. I get that. Yeah. I, we'll see. Is there? I'm putting together the video today,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
I'm curious to know: is there any aspect specifically from the Book of Oahspe having to do with technology or cosmology or what have you that you would think is really important for people to know?
Well, okay, so the last video I put out is like 9 minutes long, and it sort of summarized all the last little spurt of videos that I put together. So, ETH is described as being a solution, like a solvent solution, like water, and everything is being held in this solution, like dark matter is sort of described in science nowadays. And when you drop salt into water, it visually disappears. It's still there and can be manifested under, different circumstances. And the vortex is the motion of creation. And at the center of the vortex, everything gets condensed. So you have this motion of condensing all these materials, and as it condenses, it creates friction and heat, and that's why you have suns and molten planets that are forming. You have the narrative that science has been discovering, but they don't really understand how it works. The Big Bang does not adequately describe the laws of physics. The Big Bang violates all of the laws of physics, like angular momentum and stuff like that. All that being said, the idea of ETH and the vortex and how it manifests as electricity and magnetism and light and gravity and atmospheric pressure, all of that, right? There's a technology that I found on TikTok called tensor rings, and it is tapping into that etheric vortexian current. It's not generating anything. It's tapping into it. And so you take copper wire, which naturally is a conductor, and you take it to a very specific length dimension, and you twist it, and you loop it back on itself, and it harnesses this invisible electricity. It's naturally occurring electricity, and I believe it's programming it to sustain a specific wave form that resonates differently depending on the dimensions of it, but the dimensions are designed to resonate and sustain and heal our bodies and our minds and our spirit. And that's a technology that can be documented. You can measure the energy that's being produced every step of the way. So you can take a copper wire that's naturally conducting environmental energies, and then you can twist it and measure it again, and then you can cut it to a specific dimension and measure it again, and then you can wrap it in on itself and connect it so it's a full circle, and then measure it again, and these energies are so one, you can document it, and two, you can document the results they have, and it's not generating anything, it's tapping into the environment around. And so to me, that is a direct correlation to what's being described in Oahspe.
Tensor, the tensor coils is what you said.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And what specific place in Oahspe is speaking about this tensor field and tensor
Well,
coil?
it's not talking about it because it's using different labels, but it's talking about the ETH and the vortex and the effects that the so when the vortex is condensed into a substance like iron or steel, it produces the effect of magnetism. When it's conducted through, so it's not being dormant, it's being connected, it's being transmitted through, then you have the manifestation of electricity. Um, it's so it's using different labels, but the fact that the tensor rings only work when they're twisted clockwise, which is the motion of the vortex, and it's isolating the current. I mean, the current's coming from somewhere. It's not being generated. It's atmospheric. It's taking the current out of the atmosphere, looping it, and generating an isolated waveform. To me, because I've studied this for 2 years, that's a Waspian science. But it's kind of, there's a lot of background that would need to be discussed before that connection is really made.
Okay. So
You want something that you can present in 10 seconds.
Kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it depends. I just want to be able to make the correlation, so know where what you're speaking about in the book of Oahspe, and then make that correlation. Then in this section where it's talking about vortex or ETH, that we're looking
Okay.
at
All of that
tensors.
is found in the book of cosmogony in the
Yeah.
first chapter. In the first chapter.
Okay. Book of Cosmogony, first chapter. I'm going to go through that. Yeah, and I'm going to reference because I think, and who, yeah, I'm going to go through some of the history. Basically, this is the person who had this revelation that was revealed, wrote down this information. It's in the book of Oahspe. This is what it was talking about. And at this point in time, clearly there wasn't anything to reference in terms of this science, but obviously it was
Another,
accurate.
yeah, another thing you can do in your video is just go through some of the illustrations, like some of these black and white illustrations done on like a chalkboard or pencil or whatever. They look so much like the new images coming out of
James Webb telescope.
yeah, the new one.
Yeah.
And okay. This what does that remind you of?
Looks like cells.
Yeah, but that's a description of Etheria, how it has like I don't know if the bubble universe or string theory, I don't know what is the theory that's popular now, but they're using mathematics, which not necessarily the best way to whatever. Those kinds of illustrations, you can see science has sort of come up to the threshold of maybe the universe is like a bunch of bubbles sort of interacting with each other, right? And then you see an illustration like this in Oahspe where it's talking about how the etheric energy is like large, vast amounts of like bubbles, like etheric fields, and so did you watch the video with me and Ben? He's another faithist.
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay, so he was talking about black holes, and you might be able to add to this how there's a theory that okay, every galaxy's got like a black hole in the center of it, and somehow it's like a generation. It's generating. It's like an engine for the galaxy, and the idea was that somehow time is being generated in the black hole. Like if the black hole is the engine for motion, well, you can't have time without motion. So I mean, it kind of makes sense. But if each galaxy has a time generation engine in the center of it, that means there's a field, which means that there's there's like if you have a field of bubbles, there's gaps in between the bubbles. And so time in Oahspe, it talks about these long journeys, millions of years, and navigating through the ETH. And I'm thinking like, well, they're finding these pockets where time doesn't work the same. And that's how they're able to take a 1,000,000-year journey and not have it take 1,000,000 years. Anyways, that's not really helping you out, but that's really interesting.
Very interesting. So yes, I'm familiar that with the idea that there are supermassive black holes at the center of galaxies, and the supermassive black holes do generate, or I would say they would stimulate the matter in such a way that produce like produces the solar systems and things of stars that produce more of the same, and that that's pretty much it. The supermassive black holes and how they work, I don't think we know too much about them. But what you're saying, the concept that there would be variable time expressions makes a lot of sense, especially near something as massive as that, because there would be an uneven distribution of matter and an uneven distribution of motion as a result, because it's moving. The supermassive black holes are also not static. So they're moving, the entire galaxy is moving, and all of the things that all the matter around it is also moving. And so it's very plausible that there would be gaps and areas. In fact, we know that there are certain areas and gaps within our galaxy where there's nothing at all. Like just nothing. No stars. And it's very bizarre, like why nothing there? But in that area, what, like you said, if there's no motion, what is time? If you were to blip into this space where there's nothing around you,
Yeah, then what? How does time?
yeah, what's happening now? What is time? You become the center of time,
Mhm.
and I don't even know how to. There's no reference. So movement, I don't know. I don't know. Like I was thinking, but I don't know how that would work. But yeah, that's something to ponder. I'm curious about that. Black holes can heat gas falling into them to temperatures of millions of degrees, emitting X-rays. Yeah, for sure. And also we have accretion disks and also Hawking's gas as a result of the movement and how it's ejection that's happening at the same time while it's swallowing up things too. And we also have white holes. So there also may be a relationship between the white holes. White holes is just an inverted black hole. So instead of everything going into it, things are going out of these things. So very interesting. Yeah, so cosmogony chapter within Oahspe.
Yeah, and do a chat GPT and do a couple of queries. They'll be able to connect the dots and give you references and probably help you out.
Yeah, that's
I've
exactly
done
what I'm
that.
going to do. I'm going to
I've
feed it
done
that and
that.
say, hey, what do we, have you done that?
Oh, I've done some research into Oahspe. Using that is so interesting.
Hmm.
So interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, there's a lot. So as a tool for research, I can take some of the symbology, some of the sketches, and ask ChatGPT to give me a correlation between current cosmological objects and current cosmological processes given description. This thing is described as this. What are the things that would be similar or relate to it in given our current? And what is the origin of this information? How do we know that? And then it shows how closely it matches. But even so, yeah, I'm gonna do it because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's important to demonstrate. I basically am on this. I just came out of a live where um, Blitz. It was
Oh.
he's this physicist guy, and he is displeased that there was a disproportionate amount of praise given to a scientist, Nikola Tesla. And he's like, "Oh, Nikola
Oh.
Tesla shouldn't be given all this clout." And he made some contributions, but he has too many fanboys and people that are just giving him all this love. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand what he's saying, and I'm a fan of Tesla, but it was just fun. I feel that way though towards science as well, that there's too much credence given to the scientific methodology and to scientific knowledge, too much, as though this is the be all end all of what is true in knowledge, and anything that is not derived from that is simply not the truth. And that to me is just misguided. And I think when we take a look at ancient ancient knowledge and say, well, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we're talking about pre-discovery of, and it is a direct correlation. What do we do
Hmm.
then? What does that mean, guys? Does it mean
Yeah.
that there are plausible other methods whereby such knowledge could be ascertained? Obviously so. That science is not the be all end all of it all, and that the methodology is not to the end of things. So I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I had sort of last couple of maybe a month or so, kind of an aha moment with Dan McClellan. He's
Oh my God, dude. You mentioned Dan McClellan. Yesterday, another person had mentioned Dan McClellan. And the day before, a friend of mine had mentioned Dan McClellan. This is the third time that he's come up. I know who he is. Yeah, go ahead.
okay. So his information, his knowledge has been so useful and helpful to me. But lately, I have been realizing how much of history, cultural, and just the whole texture of everything is being picked and choose to keep a conformed narrative. I'm like, wait, how come that was never brought up? I mean, yeah, he's always talking about the consensus of scholarship is this and that, but what is being left out of the consensus that he's not talking about because all these other people are pushing back on him? I'm like, well, they're coming from a dogmatic perspective. Then I started listening to them. I'm like, yeah, they probably do have a dogma, but they're bringing up information that is being left out of the conversation. Like, and so to me, it's like what you're talking about with science. Like, the consensus is not necessarily the where you need to point your ship in that direction. It's always good to have it available, but it can be very limiting.
Do you feel that Dan McClellan is an advocate for the faith? Or do you
Oh,
feel
well,
like,
that's not his agenda. He doesn't care two hoots about faith, at least in the platform of YouTube and TikTok. I don't know about his personal life. I've asked myself, like, I don't understand why he's involved. I mean, he seems like he's really more of a cultural Mormon, and he doesn't really believe any of it. If he does believe it, he's very good at compartmentalizing, because from a scholar listening to him talk, he doesn't believe any of it. He just finds it really interesting.
That's very much in alignment with what others had said. I was having a conversation yesterday with a guy by the name of Nico. It was on Wits Live, and Dan McClellan had come up, and I said, "Oh yeah, that guy came up yesterday." In another conversation, a friend of mine was saying he seems very much like an atheist that's giving information more less than a spiritual guy or a person of the faith who's really giving some sort of apologetic. And it was then that they said, "Oh yeah, I think he's a Mormon." And I was shocked. I'm like, "What? He's a Mormon?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Yeah." And I thought, and then they follow up and said, "Yeah, he probably doesn't believe it, given that he knows the histories and he knows that it's not real in regards to like the narrative of what is scripture and all that. He knows better as a theologian. So what does
Yeah.
that even mean? It's like me saying, "Yeah, I'm an advocate for flat Earth." I know that's nonsense, but yeah, I'm totally a flat earther. But let me go ahead and show you how flat Earth theory is totally inconsistent with math. Like, wait, what? So what does that mean? That seems to be his deal, and I don't know why he happens to creep into the conversations in this. This is the third day in a row for me. Today's Tuesday. Yesterday was Monday. Had the conversation, and I think it was Sunday that Bear Cub was like, "Oh yeah, you know this guy Dan McClellan." So like, yeah, really interesting.
I would like to have a personal conversation with him, because I know quite a bit about Mormonism, just from my own personal study. How would he ever have a temple recommend? Like, there's no way he could have a temple recommend unless he's either lying to his bishops, or he actually believes all of it. Like, he would have to be so good at compartmentalizing to be able to have a section of him that was full of faith, that burning in the bosom, that testimony that Mormons have, and then on the other side just be all intellectual and be like, "No, bro, that's not how it works. This is not the consensus." Like, how do you? It's almost like split personality disorder.
Yeah. It does question as to what his agenda is when he's sharing this information. It definitely doesn't strengthen the perspective of the faith for those who are not a part of the faith. And that's just for
Yeah.
Christianity in general speaking. Like, hey, the Bible is really not credible, guys. You have to understand that there is a lot of inconsistencies. Like, okay, great. Thanks, Dan. Um, I'm not sure how that's like what that's doing. But yeah, he's definitely an interesting dude. I think people would benefit most and most of all from the practical use of these things. And I think like when it comes to faithists, there's a lot of practical use in terms of just
Yeah.
perspective in regards to freedom. An atheist doesn't, I don't think an atheist has a lot to really tear apart when it comes to faithists. Um, I don't think so because the point is not the narrative as being you need to believe this or else you're going to suffer. It's more like here is a model of reality that makes certain things more understandable or clear. And the living of this understanding is service and, wisdom and love. I mean, period. What is it's understanding. And so our job is to grow ourselves to be selfless. Like that's very practical. Like
I
how
think
can I become more of a selfless individual? How can I help others in practical ways that improves their life? I like
Yeah.
that.
I think Oahspe would be more accessible if it had been written from the start as an allegory, because it's not. it's not saying it's a perfect book. It actually says it's not a perfect book. Okay. It has that, but the whole from cover to cover is written as a historical narrative with no disclaimer. It's written as if everything in here um, was a history textbook, and I don't have a problem with that. I think it's fascinating. I would love to have confirmation of that, but I'm very comfortable with the idea of it just being an allegory. And if it was published as an allegory, people would have less things to be defensive about it. And then information within the allegory could be more easily disseminated.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot less intimidation when it comes to presentation of ideas via allegory than
Mm-hmm.
assertion that allegorical circumstances, conditions are factual and literal. And you're like, are you sure it's literal that these two people running around? Yep, it's literal. That's what happened. The donkey was talking, and that's what's going on, period.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Like, I think that's where incredulity or credulity comes into play. And people are like, nah, I don't think so. I want to tear that apart. As opposed to saying, yeah, here's this concept, and we're utilizing this as a way to convey the concept. And in doing so, it makes it much more accessible to exercising these concepts.
Yep. I think that's the biggest obstacle Oahspe has had so far is that there's an implicit claim that it's fact and that it's history. And a lot of it, I mean, nowadays, yeah, with the internet, we can sort of connect the dots and say, yeah, it's plausible that some of these things written about 20,000 years ago could have happened, but there's no way we can actually conclusively determine it. And so that gives everybody the ammunition to dismiss it.
Yeah. And that, I think, gets, I think that really distracts from the value. Like, I had a
Yeah.
conversation the other day about, I said, I believe in dragons. People are like, what in the hell? Saul, you're an idiot. I thought you were smart, but now I know you're a fool. I'm like, guys,
Yeah.
it's one, I do believe that dragons existed. Why? Not because there is physical evidence of that, at least not that is prevalent or accessible. I believe that physical dragons existed because of circumstantial evidence, because of reason, because of plausible conditions. I believe that it's very likely that there were lizards that looked like that. Given everything that we know about the dinosaurs, I'm like, how could we know that these lizards were flying around, that they were huge, they had long necks. There's nothing about the description of a of a dragon that doesn't directly relate to one of the dinosaurs. 4 legs, wings, scales. Yeah, okay. What are we saying? Sure, why not? The only thing is, oh, well, the fire, spitting fire, you think that they could have spit? Yeah, certainly, because I know for a fact that there's chemical compositions, biochemical compositions that, when meeting the air, combust and to flame. Like,
Bombardier beetle.
yeah, the beetle was the first one that comes up. It's like, of course, why would that be ridiculous? And then the circumstance for me is, well, all of the civilizations in recorded history are speaking about these flying huge ass lizards. I mean, they weren't connected, guys. They weren't on the internet. It wasn't a Reddit group. I mean, there has to be something there, and cave drawings, for God's sake. I think, for me, yeah, it makes sense that dragons are real to some degree. Were they as big? I don't know. Could they read your mind and talk? I'm not saying that, But I do believe that these creatures were probable. I mean, why would they be any less probable than a what is it called? They're a pteranodon. Like those things are freaking huge. They're huge. They're bigger than some of our huge aircraft carriers, and it's just ridiculous. And they were real. They're like, oh, they're real. We don't have any full scale bones from them, by the way. But
Yeah,
based
I
on the
know.
little bit of evidence that we have, well, look at this large ass tooth and some of the jaw. This must have been a creature that did, and we have a full model. Great. That's all. But the point is, I think it makes sense to say, well, what's important was how we can use this idea in order to investigate things that are outside of our current knowledge. Like, what kind of biochemical compositions would it take in order for there to be something that would exhale fire? Is it
Yeah.
plausible that is it just plausible that there would be creatures that would do so? We know for a fact that 90% of the biological creatures on Earth went extinct. Period. And depending upon how they went extinct, we won't have any physical evidence for them because they were burnt away. Depends, right? So I'm just saying, like, the thought process, it gets away from it instead of that is a stupid, idiotic idea. Those are just fantasies. There's no such thing as dragons. How about, you know what? Great. Maybe there were dragons, maybe there weren't. What's the point? Oh, really? An investigation as to the plausibility of that type of biological creature? Whether now, then, or in the future, something to ponder. Perhaps we could take a look. I think that is
Yeah.
a practical outlook as opposed to let's just vilify the concept altogether because we don't have the bones. I didn't uncover some bones of the entire dragon, so therefore it can't exist. What?
It's crazy. People are so willing to vilify conversation and the pursuit of curiosity. That, like, why? What are you losing by being curious? It's crazy.
Exactly. It's as though that would be somehow uh, disingenuous or wrong. Like, imagination is so key to understanding and to exploration. Imagine. This is what Einstein did. This is also part of the reason why I'm a fan of Nikola Tesla. In his autobiography, he describes his imaginings of things for them to work and what that would mean. And that led to very practical execution of these things. It's
Yeah.
imagination is a terrible thing. That if you're imagining, then somehow that's equated with delusion.
Right.
No, there's a balance here. You can use imagination in order to see something that doesn't yet exist. Was Steve Jobs delusional because he imagined the iPad back in 1984? No. He was very clear that he had imagined an iPad back in 1984. Certainly he didn't have the means in order to bring it to fruition at that time. But his mind was very clear that there were benefits and values to such a thing coming to fruition. And he was then working towards that happening. And he said, yes, it was a 20-year endeavor. But
Yeah.
and
Happened.
it happened. Who else was imagining these types of things? And not just imagining it, ideating it, saying, let's bring this into actuality here. Let's put our minds and efforts into that, and let's see it even before it's here. I don't think he looked around. No innovator ever looks around and says, well, there's an iPad. Now I have a reason to pursue it. No, that's not how an invention works. It says, here's an idea, a concept, and I'm going to look at it from the perspective of what if, and then I'm going to look at it from the perspective of how to. Then you go to work on it, and boom, you have something that you can bring forth to people that is tangible and useful.
Yep. You gotta have that curiosity and imagination. Part of it. Yeah.
Imagination. I think of the kids show. It was a SpongeBob. There was an episode of SpongeBob where he was talking about imagination. It always comes to my mind when I think about it. It's a necessity. So yeah, but at the very least, I think who was the author of Oahspe?
John Neubauer.
So let's say John Neubauer. At best, he's receiving insightful knowledge from what's it called? What's it called when you're receiving? It's not prophetic. It's
Channeling.
Yes, there's another word for it as well, but he's receiving knowledge. On one hand, it could be, yes, he's receiving knowledge. On another hand, it could be, this is the expression of his intuition. It's an intuition is what I was looking for. An intuitive insight. If it's an intuitive insight, if it's direct information or knowledge, I think what matters is, does it comport to what we know? And from what I've seen in the Book of Oahspe, the answer is most definitely yes. So I think that is something of note to say, yeah, and not only that, that means that there are means to ascertain knowledge, and perhaps profound knowledge that could quicken our ability to know things. Mm-hmm. What is it that he did? Was he meditating? Was he was he in a place where he was open to receiving things? Is that something that we can duplicate? Is it something that we can utilize? What if we did? What if we were able to explore distant galaxies from where we are right here? What if we could do that? For whatever the reasons, fill in the blank, whatever the reasons and whatever the hows, what if we could? Wouldn't it be valuable to try?
Right, instead of just dismissing the possibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to bounce.
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to utilize the cosmology section within Oahspe.
Let me say before you go, and we don't have to talk about it, but it's just a thought. Nikola Tesla, all of his technology that I can, speak of, that I am aware of, would be in line with the tensor rings, the naturally occurring electricity, the dark energy, the vortexian, whatever label. It's in line with Oahspe. Now, Einstein, I don't know a lot about it. I can't comprehend the formulas, but it seems like that's the other side of it, where that's more of the artificial sort of, that's the path of where we're at now, where everything is generated and less trying to understand the organic nature of the universe. So on one hand, you have Tesla, who's tapping into the vortexian etheric energy. On the other hand, Einstein is going a different direction. Anyways.
No, that's cool. Yeah. I need to pull that into this equation as well. I think what was what you're saying, this vortex rings is spoken, that this energy that is latent within the field, it's called, Theosophy calls it 0 point energy. And there was a Dr. Christopher Holmes. He is a double PhD and in physics and something else, and he gives a lecture on this. It's on YouTube, about 0 point energy and how this was spoken about back in, interestingly enough, she was writing this in 1870 something. Around the same time the Book of Oahspe was also being put together, 1860 something, the Book of Oahspe. So I find it interesting that a lot of this convergence of thought emerged within the same time period.
Well, you have to go and I have to go, but there is a lot of information in Oahspe why that time happened and how that fits into the procession of these long, like 12,000, 24,000 year cycles. And it's really interesting that it was like an explosion of knowledge, spiritual knowledge and scientific. It was just an explosion. Anyways, it
Nice.
says it says the reason for it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna be utilizing that and searching through the book. It's a great
Okay.
conversation. Thanks, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. I look forward to your video when it comes out.
All right, I'll tag you in it.
All right, cool. Awesome. With that, I'm going to go. Well, I have a guest, so do one more guest. Oh, Brian. Oh man. I didn't even I didn't even see that it was you. I just was having such a good time with Saul. Well, it looks like Brian was more probably interested in talking with Saul than me, but that's okay. I want to get off. It's been a really good conversation, and if anybody wants more information about the Book of Oahspe, the science, the whatever, go on my page and check out some of the videos because that is basically the only thing I talk about. I don't know if I can exit this thing.